Yo, what's up? It's Someone That's Someone, and welcome back to another story time. This will be like episode 0 for chapter 5, which as of right now I'm thinking of calling this the zoning in of a psychonaut. If you have no clue what I'm talking about, this story and series is a part of the journey that Someone That's Someone is on. It's the tale of my personal exploration of psychonautics, going through every which substance I've encountered, both of my own will and those which the universe had presented to me openly, and every which significant experience that played into this otherwise. And this is a huge episode in ways, but I will say that with this story and how everything is structured, it's probably going to feel very different from the future episodes. Probably past ones too. And partially, that's because we have to introduce how things are going to be, because the focus has so much shifted at this stage in the game for me. If you've been a fan and know about the chapters, you probably noticed I only have chapters 1 and 3 up right now. Chapter 1 is packed and really establishes my beginnings well with this. It's a must watch to understand where I'm at currently. But then with chapter 3, I think we only have 1 episode up. You may be asking why that is, and the reason being is because that was kind of like a live episode. When I made that, I was still in chapter 3, and that's the only time I ever made an episode right after an experience like that. But basically here with chapter 5, we're going to be doing a similar method. With chapters 1 through 4, I've taken my time with it, which that wasn't my intention always. I've had to figure out so much stuff in my life and make sure things were on point before actually being able to do this in an organized manner. Personally, I don't like to wait long to write out my stories, because then I have to rely on memory more. And as time goes on, the more experiences I have, the more difficult that will be. So with this, we're finally increasing the focus and the accuracy a lot more with my personal reports, on so many levels. And I don't mean just being able to recall better, but we're also fitting in more purpose, more goals, more proper dosing, and general experimentation with substances. Just more control overall. That's why I say we're zoning in. It's really time to get this together and deepen the journey I've had my attention set on for so long now. And specifically for this chapter, I'm thinking there will be about 15 to 20 different entries. At the very least, it will look something like this. At least 5 revisits, 5 new combinations, and 5 new substances. And there might be some extras, so that's why I said up to 20. But for this first episode, it is a revisit. Specifically, with my attentions on DXM Polysterex, but also I'll talk about some trips with LSD, on separate occasions that is. And before we get into this, I just want to thank everyone that subscribed. This is technically the 27K Storytime special. We do still have 1 special to catch up on, and I'm hoping to get that out sometime this month. And we are telling this story today due to the most recent poll here on YouTube and on the socials. I asked you guys if you wanted to see the LSD-DXM Chronicles or the DMT Playoffs experience, which I thought everyone would want to hear about some DMT, which I know a lot of you still do, but we'll tell this story first. This one comes before the DMT experience anyways, but you'll hear about that one sometime in the future. Anyways, make sure to catch the next poll, and you can always vote multiple times by going on the socials, the Discord server, or becoming a member or patron on Patreon. And I do want to note also that this story isn't of the combination LSD-DXM. That title may have confused some, but at no point did I have this combo. Instead, there was usage on and off between the two, more so concerning my homie. You'll just see. I do have this combo in separate stories though. But I'm excited to get this story going and to start this chapter. It's going to be quite an eventful year, and I'm going to share it as I go along, so just get ready. So without further ado, let's dive right into this. So this was all mostly with my good friend Ty, who stayed with me for a bit. Now I don't think I brought up Ty in any previous stories, but he's been a close homie of mine since we were in high school. He was actually like one of my first friends I had. We met during cross, and I remember we all ran together in track with Evan, doing the 4x4 and whatnot. Check out chapter 1 if you don't know Evan. Some crazy ass times. But not to be bragging out here or sounding like we're top shit, but we broke the school record and some of our pictures were on the wall. Also, there was some other homies we ran with. But anyways, we've always been pretty tight and he's someone I can vibe well with. We share a lot of similar interests. And since this happened recently, I'm going to keep our history pretty brief and just tell you guys the essentials leading up to this situation and what was going on. He'll be in other stories from past chapters and other times. Still, you'll get a good idea of the homie Ty here though, and what went down with both our experiences. But to set things up, Ty had recently gone through some rough patches, mainly financially and on a mental level. He had been staying in the city for like a year or two. What I mean by that, he had his own apartment in a skyscraper, with a pretty nice view and pretty much in the center of Chicago where things are always bussin'. I won't get too specific, but he basically kinda messed things up with the job he had. So he ended up moving back closer to where we grew up, staying with a few people here and there, some family and friends. Now Ty and I had been going to the gym the whole time he was going through this. So we had been going on some runs, lifting weights, shooting hoops, hitting the steam room, all that good stuff. Really taking care of ourselves and getting strong. But basically at some point, I offered him to stay at my crib if he wanted. I have a whole open basement where he could chill and set up at. Cause from what dude was telling me, man, he said he was staying at his uncle's or something, and they literally had roaches and shit, where he had to sleep on the floor. Then dude tried to stay with his one homie, but they ended up getting into an argument over some dumbass shit, so he got kicked out of there and he didn't get his rent money back or anything. So it was just fucked. And I was just feeling bad for bro seeing him struggle like this, so I asked my girl if it was cool and we offered him to stay for the low. He was down, I remember, and this is kinda when the story starts. This takes place over the span of a few weeks. Just all these different instances when we were tripping and the things that led up to it, and the aftermaths. But anyways, I remember around the same time I offered him that, I was getting some psychedelics. Just a bunch of tabs I remember. And I had asked Ty if he wanted to get any, and he said he was down. I think he got like 4 or 5. And I don't think we actually ever tripped on LSD with each other, but we tripped on and off for a solid period of this. We got these red gel tabs, which my guy told me they were a bit stronger than normal, something like 125 micrograms. And I have to say these were fire, very potent and consistent with each tab. But for me, my trips weren't anything too wild. I was mainly looking to use them as a cleaning and as a refresher, and simply for some fun. LSD typically promotes feelings of playfulness for me, and it makes me laugh a ton. So most of the time for me, it's about having a good time and diving into interest. There were moments where I took something like 2 tabs, and I had a strong out-of-body experience briefly, with very strong ego loss. I briefly forgot who I was because I was so focused in on my train of thought and the hallucinatory state that took over. I'm pretty sure this was the first trip too after I got them. But really it was just a cleaning for me in many ways, because I hadn't taken psychedelics in some months at that point. I think like 2 months since the last one. But I was doing it routinely in a way, not necessarily for a big trip, but more so in a healthy manner. That's a big reason why I got these tabs, and to have some fun of course. Also, to get ready for a series of shroom trips coming up. I maybe have like 5 or 6 acid trips, and they help me figure out some personal things and how to do some things better basically. It's a great time. Now Ty on the other hand, I feel like he would take his trips on differently. A big problem was, he was impulsive with his tabs. He told me a ton of stuff, like how he felt like it opened his third eye more and inspired all this creativity and research out of him. Which he's super creative, does architecture, is real intricate with his style and whatnot, and really has a lot of dope unique interest. So there's definitely great things he would get from LSD. But that's also where part of the problem lied. And I feel like this is something many people can be subjected to at times. And that's wanting those great things too often. I talked about tolerance and whatnot, but everyone's experience can play out differently, and how they react. Basically Ty was doing some like every few days or so, which some people microdose like that just fine. Ty on the other hand would get kind of fucked up off of it. A big thing I noticed was that it could make him a lot more socially awkward. Basically, he gave off something was up with him 10 times harder than he would normally. Which this wasn't something that bothered him all too much really. At least until things would start to catch up to him financially and regarding his focus on things. But one day stood out that I have to tell you guys. So like I said, we've been going to the gym regularly in the mornings. I would pick him up on the way there. And this one day, dude was off like a tab or something like that. He was coming up as I picked his ass up. Like just ridiculous. I was telling this guy to wait for a good time and all this, to have some patience, but he was really just trying to experience something I could tell. He didn't tell me until I picked him up, and I really just laughed my ass off and said fuck it. I could see how it could be a good time. Working out when tripping. But our workout went like normal. He was a bit goofy when it came to hooping, but we got to the steam room, went in the pool, and I was about ready to leave. So I tell him, and he told me he was gonna stay, that he would just end up walking back or something. I really didn't think too much of it, so I just said okay and left for work. Now this dude Ty was just really stupid this day. I guess at no point did it cross his mind that he didn't bring a towel or a change of clothes this day. Which I guess it wouldn't be the end of the world if it wasn't the dead middle of winter, that is. Which on top of things this day, we would end up having a light snowstorm. So he told me he realized he was fucked and didn't know what to do. There wasn't anyone around that could give him a ride, nor did he have money for an Uber. So he said he just stayed in the hot tub for like 5 hours, like a stupid long ass time. And then he tried to make the walk back to this hotel he was staying at. Which, let me tell you guys, the distance from the gym to there was probably like 3 miles or something. It wasn't anything like a quick 5-10 minutes or whatever. So guess what the hell happens when he tried to make this walk? Bro ends up getting pneumonia and ends up in the hospital. All the while off some acid. I had no clue until like a day or two later, which, just stupid, man. Like I can't believe he actually tried to do that. Which he said it was mainly because his clothes weren't dry. And I can only imagine, man. The roads were shit that day. But anyways, it took like a week or something, but he eventually got better. Which I think this is when he has to stay at my place. I remember it was just ridiculous though, how he was being around this time. Like before we set all that up, I went to pick him up for the gym again, and when I went to the place he was staying, he ended up texting me like 10 minutes after I got there that he was tripping out on a tab, and there was no way he could do anything at the time. Basically, he was encompassed in a visual landscape of varying scenarios. But even when he wasn't on acid, he would be weird around people. Anyways, cut to the day we decide on him staying. I told him what was up, how things are basically, just to mainly be cool with my girl and to be clean. He had an area in the basement to himself, so it wasn't a big deal to me. But I picked him up after I got out of work one day. He loaded my car with his things, which was just this small sleeping bag with a couple other bags. Then I think we picked up a few carts right after when I got him, which this dude was living paycheck to paycheck at the time, but of course there was always cash for drugs. But I do have to admit, I wasn't being the best influence either, because he wouldn't even have these opportunities come up if it wasn't for me asking if he wanted to go in with me. So I do have to say, this was me not really being consciously a good friend. It really didn't cross my mind at the time, that is, until I really got a scope of his financial state. Which, just a quick PSA, if you have a friend who's struggling, or maybe it's even you yourself, don't go asking to go in on drugs or other costly unneeded activities. It can be fun, it can be helpful in ways, but you shouldn't be sacrificing your overall stability over it. But like I said, it wasn't just the financials that was being sacrificed, it was his mental state in a way too, because of how often he was taking it, and him just spending his time being tripped out. Anyways, we go run some errands, and we eventually make it to the crib. He meets my girlfriend for the first time, and dude couldn't help but be goofy and weird about it, because he was off some acid. Fucking ridiculous, man. But this wouldn't last super long at least, because he would soon run out. I remember though after a few days later, I got these shroom bars, and he was trying to get one too. But before that, he kinda fucked things up in ways. I was telling him to get a new job, one that was closer since he didn't have a car. His thing is, we were like 20 minutes out from where he was staying. It just would have made sense for him, cause fuck having to Uber that all the time. And I guess it wasn't totally his fault, but after the first or second day, Ty brought up to me he was getting these rashes. I thought maybe it was like some mold or some shit in the basement, and maybe he was having an allergic reaction. But by the third or fourth day, I think he had his mom come to pick him up and go to the hospital again. Which we have no clue exactly what caused it. But he told me he was pretty sure it was the mattress he had, because he ended up throwing it out and didn't have any problems moving forward. Thing is, Ty wouldn't come back for like another month or a month and a half. After the whole rash incident, he actually stayed with his mom for a little bit, then at his other friend's dad's place. But I said he fucked shit up. Reason being is, because when he first stayed here and that happened, he ended up quitting his job over it. I told him to see a doctor and get excused for it, but I remember him telling me as it happened how he said he was probably just gonna quit because he didn't have a ride and all that and not enough time to cover. So he just said fuck it, which this was bad because he wouldn't have another job for like another couple months after this. And with everything going on, I eventually brought up to him about his mental health and how he would act strange, unpredictable, and all this at times. Which we talked about it, and he has some form of bipolar. And shortly after staying with his mom, she made him do a 10-day check-in at the psych ward. Which honestly, this was probably for the best. Even he said he was tweaking at times. But he told me he hated taking the medication for it, that it could really just kill the vibes down hardcore. Thing is, you gotta be stable with what you're doing in life. You can't be a mess and always have to depend on someone. It's a slippery slope doing that. But when he got out and everything, of course I told him I wouldn't hook him up on psychedelics like that until things settle out more. Which you can say brings us to the time zone of today's actual trips and story. I had a few trips on acid all in between this, which for the most part was good. Then I had an MDMA experience and also a few DMT experiences, which those will be for other stories. Anyways, like I said, some time passes. After all that mess I just described, we eventually start hitting the gym together again, and he brought up about staying at my place again. It was cool with me, it was cool with my girl, so why the hell not? He didn't even grab his stuff from the last time. It was just sitting there for like a month or whatever. But I was down to help the bro out. He was telling me he already had this plan set up too. He already had an interview set up at this Starbucks in the city, just a little over a week away. He was telling me how much he wanted to go back, how much of a vibe his apartment was there. And again, this guy can just be so ridiculous at times. But he was saying he would get this job and probably sleep on the trains or something until he got enough to afford for an apartment. It wasn't the dead of winter anymore, but it was far from being warm, especially at night in the windy city. Even to try and do that when it isn't cold is pretty wild. But when I pick him up this time, he had just been to the city like a week prior. And he was telling me about this men's hotel, which was basically this homeless shelter. And he was telling me this new plan when I picked him up. How he would stay there for like $20 or something a night, or like $200 something a month. And the way he described it to me, it was this building with like 3 or 4 floors. And on each floor, it was just this large area with like 200 guys or something. Which, what are you gonna expect being in the middle of the city at that price? Which, I won't even cover all the risk with that, but a known problem he brought up to me was that they had a bed bug problem. Now, I should have just said fuck that looking back at this, because fuck dealing with bed bugs or anything like that. Cause bro showed me he got bit once or twice on his arm, but I made sure with him that he got rid of them and kinda just went with it. But really, it isn't worth the risk. We didn't get any bed bugs, but just fuck all that, man. Anyways, we would hang out here and there, and Ty would always bring up all these kinds of things. Like the twin turbos, Santa Claus, watches like Richard Mille, racing, ChatGPT, the rise of AI, how he wanted to go to Spain, these certain artists, certain girls, how he wanted to start this porn website, some spiritual stuff, or just trying to figure out the next money move, or something else obscure, like showing me old coins and this and that. Really, Ty can be quite the character. Which honestly, this is awesome at times, and his expressiveness and interest is a good reason why we're friends. But again, it can also be quite ridiculous, at least I think in terms of his realism and expectations for certain things, and how they might play out. But we wouldn't trip for like another week or two. We just kinda went about things and stayed productive. At least he tried the best way he could. We went on runs and continued working out. Now originally, I had been planning on trying to take some DXM at some point. It's been on the back burner for quite a while now. If you haven't heard my recent chats with DXM, I believe I bring them up in some smoke sessions. You might know that these days, it's mainly about a sickness for me. It wasn't that way when I started, by any means. Check out my early stories with it, and I know how much I loved it. But to keep this short, basically over time, I feel like over the course of like 30 to 50 plus DXM trips, my body eventually started to resist it. I simply think I've taught my body to not want to process any of it. And in result, I end up in this somewhat sick state for a majority of it. It could potentially be other things going on as well, possibly too much serotonin in some way. I've done some research, and cannabis could be playing a role, but I haven't exactly been able to pinpoint what it is exactly with DXM that puts me in this state of sickness. Basically, it'll be like nausea, vomiting, hot and cold changes, extreme heaviness, possible overstimulation, irritability, unsteadiness, tiredness, and possibly more. And mostly, it's just for the come up, but can be longer. Thing is, I've been taking DXM hydrobromide and then DXM freebase. These are both pretty standard and are strong at the right dose. But something I didn't think about that I could try is the DXM extended release version, or DXM Polisterex. I mainly experimented with the Polisterex in the early days of my DXM usage, but saw it mainly because of how unhealthy it could potentially be to digest. Technically, it is like a form of edible plastic, so it's not something you want to do very regularly. But it never really came up or crossed my mind again to try it out. I figured it would be worth a go since the extended release doesn't hit as strongly or as fast, so maybe my body won't go straight into reject mode. Also, I have to admit, DXM is probably the best form of DXM to consume. It's the only syrup I tried, and it doesn't taste bad by any means. A little bit like medication, but get the grape flavor, and it's like a sweet drink. The orange flavor isn't too bad either. And man, just talking about this kinda makes me queasy. With the Robo-Tabs or the Joe Caps, I've gotten to a point where I would just gag on them and feel sick if I take more than 3. But I was pretty much willing to give it a go if there was a possibility of me actually having a good time again on DXM. Which I still will have a good time, but it won't be until after the come up period or most at the peak, like 3 to 6 hours after I take it. Which that is a huge bulk of the experience, and a long time to be sick as fuck. But I really wasn't sure if Ty was going to come back, but when he did and we were more settled in, I asked if he wanted to join me. Ty hadn't heard of DXM before, but he knows how much of a psychonaut I am and naturally has a trust in me when it comes to substances. Of course, I told him how it could be like a trip, but in a dissociative way, which he did tell me he tried ketamine once before. He also had done things like Molly and perks. So with that, I figured he's good to try DXM. I also made sure that his medication wouldn't interact with it. We went over the basics with it, and I told him my intentions with it too. Hopefully we could have a good time, and it made me excited to be able to trip on some DXM with a homie again. It had been years since I had done it with anyone else. But we decided to do it a couple days before he left for Chicago. I figured we could at least get a good trip in before he leaves. Cause thing is, I had no clue how often I would see him once he was in the city. And I told him I did want to do it earlier in the day, just because of how long lasting it can be. So I wake up early around 6 or 7 and start my day. I wanted to get a few things done before we had our trip. Ty joined me pretty early too, around 8 or so. I remember doing some reading, we did some talking and some research, listened to some tunes, and it was a decent way to preface the trip. But around 10 or 11, we decided to dose up. At that time, we could still be feeling the effects by midnight, so it was a good time to drink this shit. I gave him the spare box of dose on my head, we cracked that shit open, and downed it. I was a little bit worried, but honestly after drinking it, I felt pretty good about things. Now a big thing we have been on recently was running some zombies. Call of Duty Black Ops 3 custom zombies on the PC can go hard. There's some great maps, and I feel like it's much more fun when you're with a friend. I used to do it all the time back in the day, and I hadn't played in like over a year, so it was definitely refreshing. And I hadn't been playing too much as of recent, but told him for our trip, I was down to run zombies a ton. So after like 15 minutes of taking that, we set up zombies and get into a map, which just for the hell of it, I'll probably throw in some footage of the maps we played. We got really into this forest and this snow one, which they were just stupid hard. But Ty said it reminded him of sipping on some lean. The fact that it was a cough suppressant and a syrup probably gave this impression. And he said he could already start to feel some things just minutes after we took it. Which I tried not to think about it too much to be honest, and just hoped I came into it just fine. And the first 20 or 30 minutes were good. I actually started to feel some slight effects that started to enhance the quality of the game and make it trippy. But just minutes after I start to get these enjoyable feelings, it really starts to come on. I start to get this super heavy feeling out of nowhere, mainly in the stomach area and my head. The music intensified this by like 10. Then I remember all the zombies on the screen also made it overwhelming. How there would be just so many coming after you and how you had to be on your toes for it. So with all this, it easily sent me into a sick, nauseous state. I told Ty, I'm gonna throw up, and he was like, no way. And I just get into a safe spot in the game, not that it would matter, throw my controller down and run into the bathroom and yak. And just like that, I'm back in a hellish state. If you're wondering, we took 5 ounces of Delsum, which honestly, probably should have went with a lower dose, but I don't feel like it would have made too much of a difference. And the thing is, it's just bad, man, like almost painful nausea. And also keep in mind, I'm starting to trip on DXM too, and it's just like goddamn, I'm gonna have to deal with this bullshit now. But I threw up a bit, almost until dry heaving. I felt a bit better and tried to go back to playing zombies. Ty was still in the game and I hopped back in. He wasn't able to keep me alive, but it was whatever. But not even a minute in, the heaviness returns from the music and the in-game zombies, and it sends me back to having to puke. Ty, on the other hand, he was fine and not at all nauseous. But the second time I threw up, I knew this was going to be a process and something I was going to have to get through. Yes, you partially feel numb from the dissociation, but it's almost like this state of misery with how overstimulated, sedated, and how sick you can feel. And the weirdness on top of that doesn't really help. Like I would be dry heaving for a good 5 to 10 minutes in the bathroom, just puking up stomach bile at a certain point. My stomach just felt like total ass. Probably the worst scrunched up and discomfort it's ever gone through. Puking and dry heaving was the only relief I got. I think also subconsciously, my body may be naturally doing that to rid as much DXM as it can, which I feel like this state can inspire number 2s also, depending on where you are physically. But I wasn't anywhere near having to do that. But I get freezing and I turn on the heat, and then tell Ty I was gonna lay down. He wanted to hang of course, but it wasn't happening for me just yet. I told him once I started feeling better. I was hoping it would only last a couple hours and things would clear up. But I went to lie down, and let me tell you, my mental went places. Now I would get up maybe every 10 minutes or so, because naturally I started to get really sick and felt like throwing up, which would then ensue with 5 to 10 minutes of dry heaving just to feel better. And I was in this cycle, I kid you not, for like 4 or 5 hours. For whatever reason, it just took forever before the sickness went away. And I was in my head thinking the whole time, man, fuck this shit, never gonna do this shit again like this. Because I can't stress this enough, the DXM sickness state is probably the worst state I've ever been in. It's just straight misery. But it wasn't like I was just sick during this time. I am still tripping out. A lot of my mental state would be regret to be honest, but I would naturally think of the people around me and in my life in ways. Laying down, I threw a blanket on and off, and honestly, any sudden movements could set me off, so I was careful not to do too much. This included being on my phone, as even trying to take in my mental input of what was on the screen was way too much. So this is where I come back to a place I visited before, and this shit is just wild as fuck every time it happens to me. But I remember thinking of wanting to text the people I was thinking about, but I just couldn't use my phone without things getting too heavy. So I started thinking, what if I could just access my phone in the network using just my mind? And I may have talked about this in a past video, but on high dose DXM trips, I've had experiences where I felt like I left my body and my soul goes into the technological mainframe, like I'm cyborg or some shit. Like I felt like I entered this plane that I find synonymous with our technology, like Wi-Fi networks or social apps for example. It's pretty fucking mind-blowing when this happens, and even talking about it sometimes makes me wonder exactly what this state is. It's something that makes me want to explore DXM further, but my physical response limits my exploration. But anyways, I knew it was possible, so I tried to bring it up my own will. Previous times, it's mostly been something that was subconscious, just naturally from strong ego loss or ego death. But this time, I was lying down being sick, so I shut my eyes after trying to use my phone and mentally tried to access my phone. I remember I had strong after images of reality when I shut my eyes. Like I would see certain things stick, especially things emitting light, so I think this played a role into this. But I saw my phone screen mentally. And it wasn't like I was imagining my phone screen. The best way I can describe it is it being like virtual reality. It was almost like I was in this other room or on this other plane or something, because the phone screen had a set spot in space. Whenever I would move my head or anything, the phone screen didn't move with my closed eyes, but stayed in that one spot. And when I say I saw my phone screen, it was like 100% full on, like the real thing. But anyways, I opened it up mentally, which is probably the coolest part. Just imagine being able to use your mind to control your phone. It's fucking awesome. And after this, I remember wishing we could do this on the regular, and was pissed I couldn't. But I remember wanting to test this out and see if this shit was actually accurate. Does it actually align with reality? I put in the lock code and it opened. Same exact home screen, all the apps, and everything. And I opened up Snapchat, which what I was trying to use. And I remember trying to text some people. I opened up some conversations, and I'm pretty sure I completely hallucinated what they were saying to me. And I replied to whatever that was. Which, with these mental controls, I didn't even have to type. You just think it. Then I wanted to switch things up a bit, so I got off my phone. It was like my soul exited this section of the technological network and traveled to a different zone. I was wanting to run some games I remember. One game I was playing at the time was this game Fall Guys, an obstacle course game. So I said fuck it, let's see if we can run a game real fast. And I kid you not, I traveled to the zone where it took me to the homepage of the game. And I searched for a game, went in, did a race, and fucked shit up. Near the end it wasn't perfect though, so I know this shit was a hallucination. But it did feel like I was actually playing a game real fast. And I remember when I was traveling through this mainframe, there's always all this information going about. Like I feel like I would almost be taking in other people's conversations and their scenarios subconsciously through this. It's a really incredible experience. But after I ran that game in this mental space, I got real sick again, opened my eyes, and came back to this reality like almost nothing happened. And I was back in hell with more dry heaving. I was able to drink some water in about 2 or 3 hours after this started, which I threw up pretty quickly. But after this, I would have another state that kinda sticks out, but not as much as this one, as I would be in and out of it. But after another episode of dry heaving and laying back down, I shut my eyes again to see full-blown realistic hallucinations. And honestly, it was kinda breathtaking and beautiful in a sense. It was almost like the complete opposite of the technological state I was just in, because the first thing I envisioned was a close-up view of a tree and the intricacies of its bark. Not only did I see this, but it was something I felt, and it was refreshing in a sense. The next thing I remember clearly, it transformed into this river with this cabin to the side, almost like it was in Canada or somewhere deep in the wilderness. And this was also very eye-opening in a sense too, because it helped me understand DXM better, and the potential of Hysterix better as well. Because I've had hallucinations on this level. When I say real full on, I mean real full on as if you're viewing the real thing. Not choppy, not blocky, not cartoony, not some artistic creation, but it's like I'm seeing the real thing right behind my eyelids. And this would change into a series of different images, not every one which I remember. But I remember seeing a fire pit next, with a bunch of dancing going on. It was somewhat tribal, and I would open my eyes briefly, only just to go back in. And there was a change of theme at some point. There was a female presence of some sort that came into my mental space, embodied by colors of orange-pink. And during all of this, Ty still had his trip. I could hear him running some more zombies for like another hour or two. He came in at one point to check up on me, which I just said I was still sick as fuck. But he told me he was going to go outside for a cig, which from his perspective, he told me it felt like he opened up his chakras and his third eye and shit, and everything outside was super beautiful and vibrant for him. He told me he was chilling out there, and a squirrel went up to him and it opened up his mind to him. And he said he was having this psychic conversation with this squirrel, and the squirrel told him about its life and all this. Then he told me he went for a quick walk, where he ended up lying down in the grass somewhere and was staring at the sky, tripping out. He said it just felt good to lie down and be on the soil, which he was by this gym nearby. And he said some random dude from there came up to him to ask him if he was alright. But in general, Ty was having a great time on his trip. I was having quite an experience myself, but I had to go through hell to get there. But anyways, it wasn't until like 3 did I feel confident enough to try and get up. I did get up one time to shut off the music when he left, but this time I wanted to really try and get up for good. Ty was just chilling by the computer, and I come in and he looks up at me and asks if I'm good. And I just start smiling big, start laughing, then loudly say, "We back, baby, we fucking back in this. I'm reborn. This is the rebirth." All just this hype shit. All the while dapping him up hard as hell. Not that we could feel it anyways. But we were hyped as fuck, we turned the tunes on, and I just felt liberated. The JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown album had just dropped that day, I believe, and I put that on, and it just set the vibe so well. Of course, Ty and I originally wanted to run some zombies, so that's what we did. I started the game and got it set up. But out of nowhere, I'm hit with another bout of nausea, and had to dry heave again. I remember Ty was like, "Damn man, we might just have to take care of you today." But I get over this, which it wasn't long. Walk back in, dry heave out of nowhere once or twice, but then say, I'm good. And thankfully, that was the last of it. This was one of the longest lasting bouts of sickness I've had to deal with on DXM. It was a struggle to say the least. But it's always beautiful and feels amazing coming out of that for me. And from there, Ty and I actually got to run some zombies. And for the rest of the trip, we have a great time. I don't think anything else really stuck out too much. Anything big, that is. Trying to play zombies was a damn challenge, because everything was in different shapes, and it all felt wonky, but dope as fuck at the same time. I can't describe it that well, but basically, Ty was playing like garbage. With how I was feeling, it kinda put me in the zone, and I thought it was cool as fuck. But he was all slow reacting and whatnot, and disassociated a bit from the experience. Which honestly, I found hilarious at the time, because I would just keep coming around to revive him, and he had no clue how the hell he kept going down, but he was just playing like ass pretty much. I don't blame him though, but I was able to hold my own, and we did decent. There was one moment I remember, bro put on Christmas music, which was pretty hilarious, just because he fucks with Santa. And I myself was a bit loud and rambunctious, and overall it was a great time. But we played for a few hours or something until my girl got home, where I then chilled with her. And this isn't every single detail, but I don't want to make this too long or too drawn out. We made some food later and talked about it, but that's about it. Now he went to the city a couple days later, but they told him he wasn't able to start until a couple weeks later. So he still needed somewhere to stay, and it wasn't a problem for us. So fast forward to next week, we continued to do our thing, go to the gym, go on runs, hung out a bit here and there, but I asked him if he wanted to trip again. This time, I wasn't going to take the DXM, because fuck dealing with all that shit again. But I was down for some acid this time. But Ty was down to take some more DXM. I told him about the hydrobromide and the freebase versions, and he was game to try it. He chose to try the hydrobromide, which this second trip we had together wasn't super eventful, I have to admit, but it was one of the most fun. We decided on the second plateau for him, while I took 2 tabs. I had a great trip, but honestly, it wasn't anything too crazy. I honestly felt like I could have had the same kind of trip if I just took one. But just like the time before, we dosed out kinda early on, I think somewhere around noon this time. Which, to start things after dosing, Ty wanted to make up this chicken shit, which it was some shit he got from the food pantry, and it wasn't the best quality. He made a hell of a mess this time, but I was telling him not to eat all that, just because I didn't want to see him throwing up chicken vomit if he accidentally got sick. Yeah, he was good off the dosum, but these forms hit harder. But I'll have to give it to him. He insisted on eating it, and he was good the whole time. Didn't get sick one bit. But while Ty was more active on the dosum, this time around he was way more sluggish and slow. He had a noticeable robo-walk this time, and he would kinda slur his words, and be slow to respond. But still, he put on a smile, and wanted to run zombies. Which me myself, I can get so loony off acid, especially in comedic situations. Like I said earlier, I just find so much more funny, and I'll laugh like 10 times harder. So playing zombies with him was like this laugh fest for me for most of the day. I wanted to beat these stupid ass maps, and so did he, but the DXN did affect his playing. Which I won't describe specific moments, but there were tons of dumbass moments that made me crack up throughout the day. Part of it's just me being ridiculous off the acid, like being on fucking crack mode in the game, or just getting all loud and hype and stuff, blasting the music. Or some of my favorite moments was asking Ty if he saw this music video we had playing in the background. Then I remember he did this corny ass dance, all drunk like and associated. It was a fun day. We went out to hoop for a little bit, and dude could barely get around the court. I, on the other hand, was flying around and jumping all ridiculous. He told me it was like watching an NBA game. And I remember I would just kind of be fucking around with him the whole time, trying to get him to play and just dying of laughter when he would airball or some shit. But I'm probably just gonna leave that trip at that. It was a ton of fun, mostly just us hanging out, fucking around, playing some games, and talking about some personal stuff. I will say it didn't make him super talkative though compared to the Delsum, or super visual, but Ty was high and messed up for sure. But this next trip, man, this last and third trip we had together, this was an episode. I didn't really plan on having another trip, but I just said fuck it. I had a blast the last time, laughing my ass off and having fun. I haven't had a homie like that willing to trip with me for quite some time. So I just said fuck it and asked him if he wanted to trip one last time before he left that last week. And of course, based on the last trips, he was down for it. I asked him if he wanted to see what was good with the freebase this time, and he was down. But this time around, I also asked, since he had a solid second plateau trip the last couple times, if this time he wants to move up and see what was good with the third. Of course he was down for it. He said he really liked the last trips and was down to dive deeper this time. So I dosed out 480 milligrams of freebase, which I think should convert to something a bit over 600 milligrams hydrobromide, a solid dose for a third plateau trip at his weight. My third plateau trips early on were beautiful, so I was trying to set him up good. I myself took a tab, which I wasn't expecting a big trip or anything for myself, but it was something to bring on the right vibes and have a good trip with him. And this day, we decided to dose around noon or 1, which my girl was also going to be at the crib around this time. Also before dosing, we decided to take an edible, a THCO. I got us some cookies ready, about 150 milligrams each, which I'm sure this played a role into our trips. He downs it like it's nothing, and I let the tad dissolve under my tongue. And just like the last time, we were looking to just have a good time really and have some fun. These stupid ass maps we were playing were pissing us off, I remember, because we just wanted to actually beat one of these instead of just running and playing so far, just to fail right before finishing. So I remember telling Ty like, today's the day, man, we have to beat at least one of these bastards before you go. So I remember setting up the game and the music as we started to come up. I just put this random mix on YouTube, and we started playing the snow map. But I noticed right away that it was playing a lot of the music we had listened to recently on our last trips, so I wanted to switch things up. And I did this mid-game on the PC, so I had to be quick as fuck or we would just die. I put on Mr. Thug Isolation by Lil Ugly Mane, just cause his music goes hard. Now if you never heard the intro for this album, basically it's some demonic ass shit. It has these high pitched sounds, this laughing, and then just this horror type beat coming in with this scary vibe overall. Now for me, this shit is awesome, especially when I'm tripping. I just love this type of stuff. Not saying I'm like satanic or some shit, but I've always been kinda into demons and the lore behind it. And I had never heard the intro for this album before, so figuring that out while coming up was really dope. But for Ty on the other hand, I'm pretty sure this shit just sent him. I could tell it was heavy as fuck for him. He asked what I was playing, then in the middle of it, he told me he was gonna throw up. So immediately I'm like, don't puke everywhere bro. Bathroom, 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 let's go right now. And this is all ridiculous. I remember this vividly. Seeing this guy about to puke, he covered his mouth and shit, his cheeks filled with vomit, and we rushed to the bathroom. He made it to the toilet somehow, but he said he had to lay down for whatever reason, so he got on his side and puked on the bathroom mat. And I'm all like, bro. But I knew Buddy was going through it, so I wasn't mad or anything of course. I had just been in this sick ass state before by the toilet 2 weeks prior, and it can be hell to go through. But he's kind of like shaking and shit, and he's asking me if he was overdosing. But I explained to him what was happening the best I could. That he would be okay, that it would pass, that I made sure to dose him out properly, and I made sure his physical and mental state were also good. He was just super shook up, because it was a whole new level of dissociation, something that he's never experienced before. Which, making the jump from second to third plateau, it can really take you out of yourself and begin to dissociate you in ways you probably could never imagine. I grabbed him a towel and some wipes to help him clean up. but this dude could barely manage to do anything but trip out at the moment. I remember he sat up against the cabinet and started looking into the mirror. It was like one of those situations where he was probably reflecting his whole life and shit and questioning how the hell did he end up in that state. Bro was getting absolutely lost in the mirror to say the least. Like I tried to talk to him and he can barely muster a response. Like the most quiet, slow response you'd ever hear. And to get his attention too at times, I had to say things over and over, and to stop getting lost in the mirror. But he told me he just needed a few minutes and that he was probably going to use the bathroom. So I just left him to it for a bit and went on my computer for some things. I told my girl what happened and she was like, of course. And we had the music just playing. I went back after a while to check up on him and asked if the music was bothering him. But through barely open eyes, he said he was basing. So that was a good part for him. Eventually though, my girlfriend had to use the bathroom. And bro had just been chilling there, hadn't moved from the spot and was just staring in the mirror. So I had to help him clean up and stuff, and I told her not to worry about it, but we had to get him out of the bathroom. Which this was a process, and kind of hilarious. Again, I had to say things over and over, asked if he needed help, if I had to carry him or whatever, but eventually after like 5 minutes, he begins to move. And he's like a damn sloth, or like a snail. There was no way he could stand up, so he just started to crawl out of the bathroom, which I told him he could lay down on the couch. Like imagine someone crawling but in super slow motion. That's what Ty had to do, which I was just cracking up low key. But bro makes it to the couch in like 2 minutes and I bring the trash can for him in case he needs to throw up anymore. Which I was a little bummed because I was looking forward to a good game of some zombies and beating those damn maps. But instead I did a few things, cleaned some things up, and hung out with my girl for a bit. I remember though throughout the day I would be back and forth with him. I kid you not, I probably went out there like fucking 30 times or some shit, just to ask him if he was good now, and if he wanted to run zombies. Then I would fuck around with him too, and would bring up, hey bro, you ready to go on that run now? Or like, bro, let's go hoot now, we gotta play 32 tips. And I would just be cracking up every time, cause this dude was in no state to do any of that, and he just felt sick and like shit for the most part. He was like, fuck you. Cause I literally kept doing this shit until the end of our trip. Earlier on when I went to go talk to him, he was telling me that he felt like he was someone else. I think he said he was like some girl or something like that. And I brought this up to him and he doesn't even remember this part. Then at some other point, he said he was out there looking at the blinds, and that he had this vision of cups being stacked. I don't remember exactly the metaphor or whatever he was telling me, but he said he was like in this process of stacking all these different cups, each one fitting perfectly onto the last. He said it was something that was making him more whole in a sense, so there were some really trippy moments for him. But really, it's like the roles almost reversed on this last trip. Where I was sick on our first trip together, Ty ended up being sick on this last one. It was really stupid, but eventually like 6 hours after dosing, he felt decent enough to try and get up. Which at this point still, he could barely walk. He had a strong robo-walk, and I had to watch him to make sure he didn't collapse into the wall or something. And we tried to run some zombies, but he was getting overwhelmed way too easily by the music and all the gameplay. So he said he had to go lay back down. Which he did this like a total of 5 times or something before we actually got to run some games. Which again, he played like garbage, but at least we had some decent games. Sadly though, we didn't beat these maps. He told me his stomach felt wrecked, and that he was probably never going to try the freebase again, but was interested in trying Dosum again at some point. But besides that, that's really most of the trip, or the highlights for this last one. Again, my main focus for this video was my trip with Polysterex. That was my intentions overall with coming back to DXM, to revisit that and see how it would be for me, if it was something I could use without getting sick. And I got my results. These other trips were just kinda extra, but they definitely played a role into the entire vibes going on. And even though I didn't experience the DXM afterwards, it was still something being used and tripped on by the homie while he was with me. I didn't include every single detail, especially in the other trips beyond the Dosum, but it's mostly the highlights and the things that stood out for us. I feel like I gave him a good introduction to DXM. A good taste test, if you will, as he got to try the main 3 forms, Polysterex, Hydrobromide, and the freebase. And of course, a lot of LSD in between, leading up to, during the experiences, and some after actually. That's why this is a Chronicles of some sorts, but not necessarily the LSD-DXM Chronicles. That's a whole other ballgame. But now I suppose, let's get into the aftermath of this situation. So Ty had to leave that next day, I believe. He told me his first day was in the city at noon or something like that. And that's about all he told me. I told him just to make sure things were clean before he left. But this fucking guy, man, I don't know if it was from the trip or what, but he lied hard as fuck on this. He told me he stayed up most of the night though, so I know he had plenty of time to get situated. But for whatever reason, he told me he was gonna call in sick for his first day. Bro really didn't have a plan for a ride or anything. Didn't try to plan one with me or anything. So he just said fuck it and called in, saying he got food poisoning or some shit. Reckless as fuck to be honest, but the guy was cool about it and told him just to let him know the situation. Which Ty told me he planned to go the next day, cause I did offer to drop him off. We hung out one last time that night, ran some zombies, didn't beat these fucking maps, but got high as fuck one last time before he left. I dropped him off the next morning, and he was in the city for a good few weeks. Like I said, he brought out that idea of staying at that men's hotel. Remember that bedbug problem? Well yeah, it became a big issue. If you don't know, Chicago has one of the worst bedbug problems in the US. So he eventually brought some to his workplace and gave them to someone there. So basically they had to quarantine him and suspend him from work. Just fucking ridiculous, man. So now bro is back nearby staying at the place he was before. I haven't seen him since I dropped him off, which I do want to see the homie, see how everything is and all, but I gotta give it time just in case there are any bedbugs he is still dealing with. Simply put you guys, don't put yourself in situations where you know there may be an infestation of some sort. They can latch onto all your shit and can be a bitch to get rid of. And here's a little extra I'm throwing in. I did talk to Ty recently, and some things he told me about his trip. When he was talking to the squirrel when the cups were stacking, it was connected nerve for nerve, he said. He said each nerve was connected with the squirrel as he was talking with it, then each cup being stacked represented a nerve in his brain, to where every nerve got filled up, and when every nerve did, it was like he went into this DXM hole of sorts, and there was this professor watching over, and just all this different shit going on. If you want to hear more about Ty's experience, I could have him write it up and I could read it on here if you want to see. So do let me know. But I think we're going to end it here, guys. This story was packed with a lot of details and shows well what was going on during this period. And most importantly shows what our experiences were like taking LSD and DXM. Again, sorry if you thought this was the combination, but trust me, I've done that plenty of times and we aren't too far away from a story with it. So just stay tuned, guys. But let me know what you want to see next. Let me know if you like this new chapter and how I'm doing it. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, check out the socials, memberships, the Patreon, and the Discord. It's been someone that's no one, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.